Tony Fish, and thank you, Drew, for inviting me on to have a bit of a thought and share some views and opinions that I've been forming. During lockdown, I've been writing extensively about the impact and the effects of COVID-19 on us as people who are trying to work, and I've really using a 7B model to highlight some of the key things that have happened. The first bit we all went into was a bit of a breakdown where we didn't really know what was happening. Our rules and heuristics went out the window and we felt completely knackered. And what we were trying to do is work out how we should work in this new environment. Unfortunately for some people, particularly those with two working adults with a child in a one-bed flat with no outdoor space, went into a further mental breakdown and were seeing some of the effects on society that we've not looked after so many people who have found it incredibly difficult throughout this period. We're also observed people who have gone into burnout, that they were getting up at 6 in the morning, they walked 20 spaces, they sat at their computer in Zoom calls until 8, 9, 10 at night. They walked to the fridge, they helped themselves to something, and then they went to bed, and they repeated that day after day. And while some people were breaking down because they couldn't work, there was others of burning out because they just had nothing else but work. And that wasn't a great environment either, and we're seeing the mental problems occurring from there. We've also found in the latter stages that people have hit boredom. Sitting in front of the screens all day long, just repeating the same thing endlessly is not good for anybody. And boredom is now a significant effect on people. And that's because we've lost connectivity, we've lost togetherness, we've lost that emotional bridge and bond that we used to have. Some have been incredibly blessed. They've really enjoyed lockdown because they had outdoor space, they had assets behind them, they weren't worried about work and the working environment, they weren't under the pressure of the breakdown situation of losing their income, which was vital for them to survive. And they've actually got fit, they're not having to travel, and there's a bunch of people who have been blessed. Unfortunately, we've really exposed the bottom of the market. And the bottom is really the students and those who have left school, who have come straight into the working environment without skills and experience, and then have just been sent sidewards. And the bottom of the market, unfortunately, has been the retail, the entertainment industries, which has just been absolutely decimated. And right now, we're all looking at each other going, what do we actually do to support all of our friends, family, and just a whole bunch of people who have been so hit by what's happening? And actually going up into their 20s, the environment that they thought they were going to get skills and training in and being able to work is now forced into this completely new environment. But that does give them an advantage. They can learn new ways of doing things far faster than some of us. We've definitely lost belonging. And that is this togetherness. This is something that we don't quite know what we've lost until we lost it, but we've lost that piece of sitting with two humans or more in a room with a whiteboard, something that bonded us together, that gave us some form of community. And just video calls, it doesn't matter how many we do, we've lost them. And out of it, I'm desperate not for a new normal. And I don't want to go back to the old normal. What I do want is something that's better. And we're not spending anywhere near enough time thinking about what's better. And so some of the things I'm going to chat about now really is around corporate governance particularly, and how we can actually use some of these methodologies and this change to actually create something that might be better. As much as COVID's changed directly our freedom, which it really has impact, it's also affected what we value. And it's caused us to question the economic cost of ourselves, and the significance to others, and how we're going to pay back some of this. But also it's really raised the issues of mental health, because across all the Bs there's been significant changes, and we've lost some of the piece which was our long-term well-being. Some of the issues that got thrown up around plastics, we've gone backwards, not forwards, and therefore how do we get to a better place? On the other side of it, we know the joke that's done the circular. We've all smiled, laughed, and actually deeply gone, that's so true, which has been what is the key motivator and key driver for change, and particularly digital change and therefore digital transformation. And once it was the CEO, then the CDO, then the CIO, but when COVID-19 came along and it put its tick on the list of things that could create change, suddenly we've done change that we never thought was possible. And what we've achieved in 6 months would have previously taken us 6 years. In fact, sometimes some of the things we did in the early 6 weeks would have taken 6 years. Digital transformation as a bunch of thinking is not new. Year 1999, 2000, it started to emerge on Google Trends. And in 20 years, we've spent trillions of dollars, but it never had an urgency. We always sort of coupled it to what we were doing with our economics and bit of competition and where we should be going and looking at going forward. But what COVID did was produced urgency and said, we've got to create change, and we've got to create that change now. And there's no other option. You've just got to do it. And that's what we've been doing. We didn't actually afford the questions and time and thinking, but we'll come back to what that actually means. The boardroom, which actually ends up as an 8th B as well, is having to change, and is having to change through this process. Already on the agenda was ESG, environmental, social and governance. And, thrown in by COVID was the legitimacy of you even paying a dividend. So the board meeting was thrown from both short-term, quarterly by quarter, to actually much bigger issues, and actually where are we going and what are we doing and why are we doing it. The long-term effects of what we're doing isn't just on our short-term income. It isn't just on our assets. Actually, reality is when we don't pay dividends, it doesn't go into our pension funds. And if it doesn't go into the pension funds, it means that other people later in life are going to be affected. Not only that, it stops the investment theses that come forward for where we're going to be putting money. So a lot of the change that's happening is going to have massive implications across all of society. The shareholder-centric agency theory model, which really has provided corporate oversight and gave a way for society, health and resilience. And those aspects have come through in spades compared to what companies were trying to do. But there's this realization that society needs foods, and that food is provided by companies. And companies have had to wake up that their role is not just to maximize profit. Actually, it was to give food. And in times of emergency, we really need the food, not profit maximization. So we've got some questions that are being thrown up. The questions at the board, some of them are still incredibly short term. How do we get to our next quarter results? But they've given away to how do we actually make sure we've got safety for our employees. Once upon a time, we were looking at certain skills and getting them up and going. And the urgency that's come through, we've become more skilled focus. The performance, the efficiency and risk have been supplemented by a change in our attitude towards risk and safety. But the classic compliance thing that we did at boards, are we doing what we should be doing as efficiently as possible, continues. And so it should, because that is part of the remit. The longer term questions that most boards deal with are timeless. Are we heading in the right direction? Have we got a North Star? Do we know our purpose? And have we got the right team in place? And have we got the right vessel? We've added to that, as I've already said, ESG and being better ancestors. But that is classic governance. And actually, we haven't lost that in anything that's gone forward. Where the change really is in the medium-term questions, the 1 to 3 years, because they have become substantially harder. So much is changing and so much continues to change. And actually, we want desired outcomes, but actually the desired outcomes have become not just linearly changing, not just exponentially changing, but in a complex adaptive system changing. Because we've got data which is changing how we can make those decisions. And it's the data about information that we need to make decisions about, which we never had data about before, which adds complexity to what we're doing. We've automated so many processes, and we actually don't now quite understand what those automated decisions are actually doing for our organizations and our cultures. That raises the question of ethics. Who is making decisions, and is there an automated process that's making our decisions? Which then carries across into innovation, which has been on the agenda for a while, but suddenly has become so much more real. But it still opens up the last one, which is what are the skills we need to actually go forward, assuming not just this COVID and this global pandemic will continue, but actually systemic risk is something that we should be facing far more. Classic CEO thinking has always been about finding and retaining the right skills. What skills do we need in the next 3 years? Broadly, that is the same. But we've also got to consider, how do we actually train up those who are much younger that they can actually get some skills that kind of like we've lost the mechanisms for actually being able to do. So we can't just depend on those skills turning up on our front door. Engineering's faced that for a while, but the reality is I think about every industry is now going to face it. There is no doubt executives and directors want to make better decisions, and better decisions need data. Data was driving digital transformation. Competition as the driver of digital transformation kind of like took it forward at its own place. COVID upturned that, which we've said, and made it actually produced an urgency, because the reality is the competitive budget didn't drive it fast enough. We've spent 20 years and several $1 trillion not getting very far. And in a very short period of time, we've demonstrated that we can do it. However, what we would have also been doing in taking our time is updating our existing risk frameworks. And the purpose of updating the risk frameworks as we went meant we could move between policy and we could move between rules and how we understood what we were going to do. What we've done is now make universal change without updating our risk. Without updating our risk with new data, we've now ended up with an exposure. And we need to understand what that exposure means to us and how we can go about it. A wider context is data no longer just sits inside your organization, it sits within the ecosystem. Now, they've got to find ways to be able to share relevant data across ecosystems so all of us can understand the types of risk that we're facing. Unfortunately, not all data is created equal, and not all data across all ecosystems has the same relevance. Some of that data is in our domain, some of our data is not in our domain. Some of our data is in control, some of it is not. Scale did provide an advantage, but when you're talking about scale of data you don't understand, the advantage may have been lost. Let's pick up an example of what I mean. The directors of most organisations have always worked on the basis of delegated authority to executives and leadership teams. And at a board meeting at some point in time, a delegated authority would have been given to, say, the HR director. And part of the remit would have been, please make sure that we find the right people with the right skills for the right roles, and there's a match between the culture, the availability, and the skills that that person will bring. And over time, HR built up a body of knowledge and work practices that allowed the company to effectively find and retain the right talent. The CFO, a number or more recently, would have mandated that each department across an organization has to be more efficient. You know, to remain competitive, we have to find ways of gaining cost control, but also in drive efficiency. And the way we tended to do that in the more recent time is to create automation. Now, automation means that we effectively take the data sets we've got, we find a digital platform which is running an algorithm, and what we've done is we've built actually what HR was doing with people and paper into processes and procedures, which is now actually run on a machine. So a person can put up an application and says, please apply for the job comes back with profiles which are automatically sorted through by the algorithm, which is then actually, in some instances, put up with a chatbot, and actually terms are sent out and no humans involved. So suddenly we had a delegated authority to a person, the HR director, who had then had a team of people who managed the process. We still have the delegated authority to the HR director, but now there's a series of automated processes within the organization which are doing something. And the question is, what are they actually doing? And do we actually understand the work the algorithm's doing? And was it based on new data, old data? Are we just actually fulfilling the same skills and capabilities we had rather than the capabilities we now want? Going through COVID and the change, are we actually now finding the skills we wanted previously or the skills we now want? If the algorithm is effectively self-contained, it will be off doing the same things. In fact, it may have been a self-learning algorithm and fantastically improving itself, but now the data set needs to change. How are we going to actually change the algorithm and the processes and procedures? The HR director is accountable. Okay, we've not moved that, but cannot possibly know how the decisions are made, because the HR director is exactly an HR director. They're not suddenly become a data expert or a technology expert. They haven't become a statistician. They haven't become an ethicist. They haven't become an anthropologist. They haven't become a psychologist. They are an HR director. But where is the machine responsible? And where is the board responsible? Who takes accountability for when it all goes wrong? Just saying we don't understand how decisions are made doesn't mean that we haven't or shouldn't be able to update our risk profile. We've made a choice. Now, how do we actually understand that choice? And how do we actually articulate and report on those series of choices such that we understand the complex decisions we've made? We're expecting the director, an HR director, to have all of these new skills. So the question then comes back, if they're not going to have the skills, who at the board has those skills? Who has the capabilities? And it's maybe not just about one person having capabilities, how do several people? Much like we did with finance a number of years ago, where everybody went on a finance course as a director. Maybe we now need to start looking at how do we get data skills into some of the board roles as well, at a much better place so we actually understand how decisions are being taken. With an organisation of an average size, now having 2,000 automated processes, we are introducing new types of risk into the organisation. And particularly with COVID, in the way that we've actually moved forward so fast, we've probably not updated our risk profiles. So one of my observations is we should be starting to look now, with a bit more time, at how do we update the risk profiles and how do we update the skills on the board to be able to make sure that we're still making the right decisions. Not only making right decisions, how do we make better decisions? So the parting thought over a cup of coffee, shame we can't all sit around and have a bit of a chat and a whiteboard on it. So the easiest way is probably to reach out to me. Easy to find me on LinkedIn or on a quick Google search. You'll find me at Tony Fish. And I write most of this stuff on Medium if you want a longer piece. And I publish quite a few of this on LinkedIn as well. Digital transformation brings automation. We know that. Automation itself changes culture, responsibilities and accountabilities. Something we probably haven't discussed enough. How do we get directors and boards to remain informed about the changes that are right and have consequences and understand the implications, because they ultimately are liable, which is something they cannot get rid of. Urgency has been a fantastic driver. Reflection is really good. Making better decisions is where we want to be, and it's critical for our next phase.